Living on a farm has its perks. Nobody breathes down your neck about how tall your grass is, or whether your mailbox matches some imaginary community aesthetic. The only rule out here: don't mess with a farmer. That's it. Simple. But apparently, the HOA didn't get the memo. It all started on a Tuesday morning. You know, one of those crisp, peaceful mornings where you're just grateful to be alive. I just poured my first cup of coffee. Duke was scratching at the door, eager to patrol his kingdom, and the world seemed perfect. Then I heard it. The unmistakable growl of a generator, followed by the high-pitched whine of a power saw. Now, I don't have a lot of rules on this farm, but one of them is, if you're going to make that much noise before 9 a.m., you better be me. So, mug in hand, I stepped outside, trying to figure out who was disturbing my peace. By the time I got to the top of the hill, I saw them. 3 guys in neon vests, swarming my bridge like termites on a fresh log. One was holding a clipboard, barking orders like he'd just been promoted to general of the "we don't know what we're doing" brigade. The other 2 were busy dismantling the planks of my bridge. My bridge, mind you. The only way on and off my property. At first, I thought, surely this is a mistake. No one's stupid enough to just waltz onto private property and tear apart a man's livelihood. But as I got closer, I realized, oh no, they were absolutely that stupid. Hey! I shouted, waving my arm. What the hell are you doing to my bridge? The guy with the clipboard looked up, and I swear, the smug grin on his face made me want to toss my coffee right at him. Good morning, sir, he called out, like he was greeting a customer at the DMV. We're here on behalf of the HOA, just addressing a safety concern. I stopped dead in my tracks, trying to process what I'd just heard. The HOA? On my land? I've lived here for 10 years, and the nearest HOA is a good 5 miles away. The only safety concern around here is whether or not I'll twist my ankle laughing at their audacity. Let me get this straight, I said, walking closer. You're tearing down my bridge because the HOA told you to. That's correct, clipboard guy replied, not even blinking. This structure doesn't meet community standards. It's a liability. Oh, a liability, is it? That's rich, coming from the guy standing on my private property with a power saw. Listen, I said, my voice steady but loud enough to make the 2 workers pause. This is private land. You've got no business here. So pack up your tools and leave before I call the sheriff. Clipboard guy gave me this pitying look, like I was some clueless child who didn't understand the big, important world of HOA bureaucracy. Sir, he said, flipping through his papers, the HOA has authority over this entire area. We're just doing our job. I could feel my left eye twitching. Authority over this area? I gestured to the wide-open fields, the creek, the barn in the distance. Buddy, you're about 5 miles off the HOA's map. So unless you've got a magic wand that rewrites property lines, you're trespassing. That's when one of the workers, a big guy with arms like tree trunks, decided to chime in. Look, man, we're just following orders. You want to fight it, take it up with the HOA board. Oh, don't worry, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I'll take it up with them. But first, let me make something clear. If you don't stop what you're doing right now, you're going to have 2 problems. I pointed at the power saw still whining in his hands. 1, you're not going to have a saw anymore. Then I whistled sharply, and Duke came bounding down the hill, teeth bared and growling like he'd just found a raccoon in the henhouse. And 2. Duke's a good dog. Loyal, friendly. But he's also 90 pounds of muscle and attitude, and he knows how to make an impression. The 2 workers froze, their eyes darting between me and the dog. Clipboard guy, to his credit, held his ground, but I could see him sweating. Is that a threat? He asked, his voice a little higher pitched now. No, I said, smiling. That's a promise. Now pack up and go before Duke decides he doesn't like trespassers. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the big guy with the saw muttered, "Screw this," and started packing up the tools. Clipboard guy looked like he wanted to argue, but one sharp bark from Duke changed his mind. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving behind half-dismantled planks and a mess of splinters. As their truck disappeared down the road, I stood by the bridge, Duke at my side, surveying the damage. "Well, boy," I said, scratching his ears, "looks like the HOA just made their first mistake." Duke wagged his tail, but I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. If they thought they were getting away with this, they were sorely mistaken. The morning after the bridge fiasco, I was still steaming. Every time I looked out the window and saw that gaping hole in my bridge, my blood pressure spiked. I'd been crossing that bridge for years. It had held up through storms, floods, and even one very questionable attempt to haul a tractor that was definitely too heavy for it. But apparently, it didn't pass the HOA's sacred, community standards. I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. If Clipboard Guy and his crew thought they could just waltz onto my property, dismantle part of my bridge, and get away with it, they had another thing coming. So, after finishing my coffee, priorities, obviously, I grabbed my truck keys, loaded Duke into the passenger seat, and headed into town. My first stop. The HOA office. If you've never had the misfortune of stepping into an HOA office, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a dentist's waiting room, but somehow more soul-sucking. Beige walls, motivational posters about community harmony, and a faint smell of stale coffee. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, glanced up as I walked in. "Can I help you?" she asked, not even trying to sound polite. "Yeah," I said, plastering on my best fake smile. "I'm here to see whoever's in charge of tearing down bridges that don't belong to them." She blinked, clearly not expecting sarcasm this early in the day. "You mean the HOA president?" "That's right," I said. "Let me guess, she's the one with a clipboard and a god complex." The receptionist looked uncomfortable but nodded. "You'll need an appointment." "Well, I'll be sure to send a calendar invite after I get my bridge back," I shot back. "But for now, I'll settle for just 5 minutes." Before she could argue, the door behind her opened, and out walked the woman of the hour herself, Marcy. Or, as I like to call her, the clipboard queen. She was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-50s, immaculately dressed, and armed with a clipboard that was practically glowing with self-importance. Her smile was the kind of thing you'd see on a car salesperson, fake, calculated, and ready to drain you of every last dollar. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Oh, absolutely," I said, stepping forward. "You can start by explaining why your little demolition crew tried to tear down my bridge yesterday." Her smile didn't falter, but I saw the briefest flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Ah, you must be Mr. Carter. We sent you a notice last month regarding the bridge." "No, you didn't," I said flatly. "What you sent me was a glossy brochure full of HOA propaganda and a vague mention of community improvements. I'm not in your HOA, and my property isn't within your jurisdiction. So why exactly do you think you can touch my bridge?" Marcy clasped her hands in front of her clipboard, radiating fake patience. "The HOA has a responsibility to maintain the safety and aesthetic standards of the community. Your bridge posed a liability." "It posed a liability to who?" I interrupted. "The cows? The squirrels? News flash, lady, nobody crosses that bridge but me. And even if it was a problem, you'd still have no right to come onto my land without permission." Her smile tightened. "The HOA has the authority to address community concerns, Mr. Carter. If you disagree with our actions, you're welcome to file a formal complaint." "Oh, I'll do more than that," I said, my voice low. "I'll see you in court before I let you and your clipboard mafia get away with this." For the first time, her smile slipped, just a little. She wasn't used to people pushing back, and I could tell it was throwing her off. "Well," she said, recovering quickly, "if that's how you feel, then I suppose we'll let the legal system decide. But I should warn you, Mr. Carter, the HOA has a very thorough legal team." "Great," I said, turning to leave. "I hope they're thorough enough to explain why you're trespassing on private property and filing fraud claims with the county. Should make for an interesting case." As I walked out the door, I could feel Marcy's eyes boring into the back of my head. Back at home, I started digging. If Marcy wanted to play the legal game, I was more than happy to oblige. I pulled out every document I had, property deeds, tax records, county maps. Sure enough, my farm was miles outside the HOA's official boundaries. Even better, I found a letter from the county that explicitly denied the HOA's request to expand their jurisdiction into my area. They'd tried to annex nearby properties a year ago, and the county had shut them down cold. Feeling pretty smug, I called up a buddy of mine who worked for the county records office. He owed me a favor after I helped him out with a truck repair last spring, and within an hour, I had copies of the HOA's rejection letter, their bylaws, and even some juicy meeting minutes where Marcy and her cronies discussed their plans to assert influence over nearby landowners. Oh, it was game on. But I wasn't just fighting for myself. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been targeted by Marcy and her clipboard army. My neighbor Jim, who's been retired longer than Marcy's probably been alive, mentioned that the HOA had fined him for having an unapproved chicken coop. Never mind that the coop had been there since the 1980s. Then there was Lisa, a single mom running a small organic farm down the road. She'd refused to pay some bogus access fee the HOA had slapped on her, and a week later, her irrigation pipes mysteriously got cut. By the time I'd talked to half a dozen neighbors, it was clear, this wasn't just about my bridge. Marcy and her HOA were on a power trip, and they'd been steamrolling anyone who dared stand in their way. So we formed a plan. Lisa handled the media side. She had a friend at the local paper who was more than happy to hear about HOA corruption. Jim, who used to work in law enforcement, offered to help with gathering evidence. And me? Well, let's just say I was ready to play hardball. Let me tell you, there's nothing quite as satisfying as turning the tables on someone who thinks they're untouchable. After my chat with Marcy, I'd made it my personal mission to peel back every layer of her HOA empire and expose it for the overreaching mess it was. By the time our little coalition of neighbors met up again, I had a file thick enough to rival one of Marcy's clipboards. But we still had work to do, because if we were going to take this thing down, we needed to hit her where it hurt. Our first meeting took place at Jim's place. His kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and bacon, which I appreciated, since it balanced out the bitterness of the task at hand. Around the table sat Jim, Lisa, me, and 3 other neighbors who'd been burned by the HOA. Jim spread out a county map on the table. "All right," he said, stabbing a finger at the area highlighted in green. "This here's the official HOA boundary." I leaned forward, tracing the lines with my finger. Sure enough, it stopped well short of my property, as well as Lisa's and Jim's. "This is all they're legally allowed to manage," Jim continued. "But here's where they've been issuing fines and sending out notices." He pointed to a larger area marked in red, an area that included all of our properties. "Let me guess," I said. "They didn't get permission for this expansion." "Not even close," Jim said, pulling out a stack of documents. "The county denied their request last year, but it looks like they've been pretending it went through anyway." Lisa shook her head, her frustration evident. "And nobody stopped them?" "Oh, they'll care," I said, holding up the rejection letter I'd gotten from my buddy at the records office. "Especially when we show them this. They've been filing complaints and issuing fines based on a jurisdiction they don't even have." As we dug deeper, the scope of the HOA's antics became clear. Lisa shared how they tried to intimidate her into paying the so-called access fee, claiming it was for road maintenance. "Funny thing is," she said, "I maintain that road myself. Haven't seen a single HOA truck out there. Then there was Greg, a quiet guy who owned a small orchard just outside the subdivision. He'd been fined for unauthorized fencing after putting up a deer-proof barrier. The fence doesn't even face their property, he said, shaking his head. But they said it didn't align with the aesthetic. And Jim, bless his heart, had a whole binder full of letters he'd received from the HOA over the years. Everything from the color of my barn to the height of my grass, he said, flipping through the pages. And none of it's enforceable. They're just hoping people don't know any better. By the time we were done, we had enough stories to fill a novel, and enough evidence to make Marcy and her clipboard army squirm. The next step was getting the word out. Lisa's friend at the local paper agreed to run a feature story on HOA overreach, complete with interviews and photos of the damage they'd caused. Meanwhile, I took to social media. Now, I'm not usually the kind of guy who spends a lot of time online, but even I could appreciate the power of a well-placed Facebook post. Within hours of sharing the story, my inbox was flooded with messages from other locals who'd had run-ins with the HOA. One message stood out, a former HOA board member who'd quit after clashing with Marcy. She runs the HOA like a dictatorship, the message read. Most of us just went along with it because we didn't want to deal with her wrath. But everything you're saying, it's all true. And worse. Oh, I was all ears. The day we released the story to the paper, I stayed up late, scrolling through comments on the article. People were furious. Finally, someone was shining a light on the HOA's antics. I was just about to shut down my laptop when Duke started growling. Not the kind of growl that says, I hear a rabbit, but the deep, menacing one that says, someone's here who shouldn't be. Grabbing my flashlight and my shotgun, because you don't live on a farm without being prepared, I stepped out onto the porch. Duke was already at the edge of the driveway, hackles up, staring into the darkness. Who's there? I called, sweeping the flashlight beam across the yard. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a rustle in the bushes. All right, I said, raising the shotgun. You've got about 3 seconds to show yourself before this gets ugly. To my surprise, a man stepped out of the shadows, hands raised. He was middle-aged, balding, and wearing a rumpled suit that didn't quite fit him. Whoa, whoa, he said, his voice shaky. I'm not here to cause trouble. I heard about what you're doing, and I thought you'd want to know something. Who are you? I asked, lowering the shotgun slightly but not entirely. My name's Rick, he said. I used to be the HOA treasurer. Once I was sure Rick wasn't a threat, and after Duke gave him a thorough sniff down, I invited him inside. Over a cup of coffee, he told me everything. Marcy's been running the HOA like her own little fiefdom for years, he said. She pressures people into compliance, fudges numbers to make it look like the HOA is doing more than it is, and bullies anyone who steps out of line. He went on to explain how the HOA had been collecting fines from properties outside their jurisdiction and funneling the money into special projects that benefited only a select few board members. She's got the board wrapped around her finger, Rick said. Most of them are too scared to stand up to her. But there's one thing she's terrified of. What's that? I asked. Bad press, he said. She's obsessed with the HOA's image. If the community turns on her, she's done for. That was music to my ears. I won't lie, Rick's intel was a game changer. If Marcy's one true weakness was her obsession with keeping up appearances, then I knew exactly where to hit her. It was time to take the fight public and make it as loud and messy as possible. The first step. Letting the whole community know just how deep the HOA's corruption ran. With Rick on board, we had an inside man who could confirm everything we'd uncovered, from the fake fines to the misuse of funds. The plan was simple. Turn Marcy's own neighbors against her and watch her empire crumble. The day after Rick spilled the beans, Lisa's article hit the front page of the local paper. The headline? HOA overreach, residents speak out against unchecked power. It was a masterpiece of small-town journalism. The piece included interviews with me, Lisa, Jim, and Greg, as well as photos of my half-dismantled bridge, Lisa's sabotaged irrigation pipes, and Jim's infamous, unauthorized, chicken coop. The article also mentioned the HOA's shady attempts to expand their jurisdiction and hinted at potential financial mismanagement. By noon, the town was buzzing. At the feed store, the diner, and even the post office, people were talking about Marcy and her clipboard brigade. And the best part? Not a single person was on her side. That afternoon, just as I was getting ready to check on the cows, my phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line read, HOA Financial Records, Confidential. I frowned, opening the email. Inside was a single sentence, thought you might find this useful. Attached were dozens of scanned documents, budgets, expense reports, and emails between Marcy and the other board members. As I scrolled through the files, it became painfully clear just how deep the HOA's corruption ran. There were payments for landscaping services that didn't exist, invoices for security upgrades that had never been installed, and even a line item for a team-building retreat that was suspiciously vague. And then there were the fines, thousands of dollars collected from properties outside the HOA's boundaries, all funneled into a mysterious, special projects fund. I forwarded the email to Lisa, Jim, and Rick, then called Lisa. "Do you see this?" I asked. "Oh, I see it," she said, her voice tight with anger. "This is a smoking gun if I've ever seen one." The HOA's next monthly meeting was scheduled for that Saturday, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. We'd spent the week rallying support, and by the time the meeting rolled around, the community center was packed to capacity. Marcy, dressed in a crisp blazer and clutching her trusty clipboard, took her place at the front of the room. She smiled her usual fake smile and launched into a speech about community values and maintaining harmony. I let her talk for about 5 minutes before raising my hand. "Mr. Carter," she said, her smile faltering just a little. "Do you have a question?" "Oh, I've got more than a question," I said, standing up. "I've got some concerns about how the HOA is operating, specifically outside its jurisdiction." Her smile froze. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean this," I said, holding up a stack of documents, the HOA's rejection letter from the county, a map showing their actual boundaries, and a few choice excerpts from the financial records. "This is proof that the HOA has been illegally fining property owners and using the money for, well, let's call them, questionable purposes." The room erupted in murmurs. Marcy's face turned pale. "That's absurd," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "The HOA operates with full transparency." "Oh, really?" Lisa stood up, holding up a copy of the financial records. "Because these payments for landscaping and security sure don't look transparent to me." "And what about the fines you've been collecting from people who aren't even in the HOA? Care to explain that?" Marcy opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then Rick stood up, holding a printout of one of Marcy's emails. "This one's my favorite," he said. "It's from Marcy, instructing us to find creative ways to encourage compliance from non-HOA members." "Sound familiar, Marcy?" The murmurs turned into shouts. People started demanding answers, questioning every decision the HOA had made under Marcy's leadership. By the end of the meeting, it was clear, Marcy's reign was over. The board voted unanimously to remove her as president, and the county announced an official investigation into the HOA's finances. As for me, I walked out of that meeting with a smile on my face and a promise from the board to pay for my bridge repairs. Lisa and Jim got their fines refunded, Greg got to keep his fence, and the rest of the community finally got a taste of justice. There's a special kind of silence that falls over a town after something big happens. It's not the usual quiet of early mornings or late nights. It's the hush of people pausing, processing, and figuring out how to move forward. That was the mood in the days following the HOA's public humiliation. Marcy's name had become a punchline overnight. People were calling her "Clipboard Queen" at the diner, the hardware store, and just about anywhere else locals gathered to gossip. The story spread like wildfire, fueled by Lisa's article, the town hall debacle, and a few well-timed Facebook posts. And the phrase, "Don't Marcy me," is now shorthand for overstepping your boundaries. But while the town had moved on to mocking Marcy, I still had unfinished business. A few days after the meeting, I was out by the creek, taking measurements for the bridge repairs, when Duke's growl alerted me to company. I looked up to see a familiar figure trudging down the hill, Rick, the former HOA treasurer. He looked a little worse for wear, his suit rumpled and his tie slightly askew. "Morning, Rick," I called, leaning on my tape measure. "What brings you out here?" He hesitated for a moment before answering. "I thought you'd want to know what's happening with the investigation." "Oh." I raised an eyebrow. "And what's the verdict?" Rick sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's bad. Real bad. Turns out, Marcy wasn't just skimming from the fines. She was funneling money into her personal accounts. The county's found over $50,000 in misappropriated funds so far, and that's just the beginning." I let out a low whistle. "That explains all those special projects." Rick nodded. "The board's in full-blown damage control mode. They're offering refunds to everyone who was fined illegally, but, well, the HOA is basically broke now. Most of the board members have resigned, and the county's taking over until they can figure out what to do next." I didn't feel an ounce of pity. Good. Maybe they'll think twice before pulling stunts like this again. The HOA, or what was left of it, agreed to cover the cost of my bridge repairs, but I wasn't about to trust them with the job. Instead, I hired a local contractor, an old friend of Jim's who knew his way around a toolbox and wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. The day the new planks went down was a satisfying one. Standing there with Duke at my side, watching the workers secure the final boards, I felt like I'd reclaimed something that had been taken from me. Not just the bridge, but the principle of it all. "This is what a real community looks like," I said to Duke, patting his head. He wagged his tail, clearly agreeing. Word around town was that Marcy had fled the area shortly after the county announced the investigation. No one knew where she'd gone, but rumors ranged from wellness retreat to her sister's basement. Jim, ever the optimist, had a theory. She probably hightailed it up to some HOA-free neighborhood where she can't boss anyone around. Lisa laughed at that. If such a place exists. The fallout from the HOA's collapse had a silver lining. With Marcy and her clipboard brigade out of the picture, the community started to heal. Neighbors who'd been at odds over fines and petty disputes began working together again. Lisa's irrigation system was fully restored, and Greg's deer fence stayed exactly where it was. Jim, always ready with a grin and a beer, started hosting informal town hall meetings at his place to make sure the HOA didn't try to rise from the ashes. As for me, I went back to my quiet routine. Feeding the chickens, fixing fences, and occasionally sipping coffee by the creek. Life felt normal again, though I kept one eye on the horizon, just in case another clipboard-wielding menace decided to test their luck. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail from the county. It was an official document stating that the HOA's jurisdiction had been permanently reduced to its original boundaries, far, far away from my farm. I framed the letter and hung it in my barn, right next to a picture of the rebuilt bridge. It was a reminder that sometimes, standing your ground is all it takes to bring down an empire. And if Marcy, or anyone like her, ever tried to cross that bridge again, well, let's just say Duke and I would be ready.